you ready to level up your gaming skills and gain a competitive edge in life? Welcome to this Valorant Life podcast, where we delve into the psychology of gaming, competition, and personal growth. In this episode, you'll hear insights from the world of esports, unraveling the secret to peak performance, why you need to tame your critical self, and how to stay in the zone. If you've ever wondered how you can elevate your game and unlock your full potential, stay tuned. Let's get into it. Welcome to this Valorant Life podcast, episode number 2. I'm your host, Tim, also known as Replacement Level. I wanted to talk about taking care of yourself and self-improvement today. Adam, I'm excited to talk about this. I think it's a really important topic, and it doesn't get much time in this space. So let's start off with the big picture, Adam. Why do you even think we play video games?
So I think for the majority of people, it's kind of like an escape, escape from real life, responsibilities, things like that. And it's just very easy to get sucked into it. Video games by design are probably just meant for our attention, anyways. So I guess like the reason why this topic is important to establish is just because since it can kind of turn maladaptive so quickly, and kind of like suck, I guess, your time away from things that are important. It's really important to highlight, I think.
Well, in your mind, what's a better why for playing video games?
I think you can kind of use video games as leisure time, but maybe it's better to use video games as like a highlight to your personality weaknesses. It really reflects quickly on whether or not like you have good social skills or like you manage your emotions well, or if you're learning and applying things like that. So I think it's a very good way to use your, I guess, improvement in a video game as like a mirror.
Mm. When I first started playing video games competitively, this was like 1997, and it was Tribes, but then it moved into CS. And what I actually really found, what I loved about it, was how competitive it was, and
Mhm.
how there was like this rush of winning, and also like the camaraderie of playing with teammates. But I think actually for me, like the why is actually kind of like changed, because there's a couple of guys in the league space, Coach Curtis and Nathan Mott, and they kind of put it forward that league can actually be a place where you work on developing certain skills like growth mindset, self-efficacy, and EQ, and taking ownership. And so I think for me, actually, it changed just a couple of years ago, where I used to think of it, it was kind of like a waste of time. And now I really feel like it can be a place where you can actually use it meaningfully to like develop skill sets. I
Mhm.
know. What's been your experience with that?
I would say that's fairly true. At least like when I was competing, like I definitely didn't have any drive to have like self improvement or anything. It was always game first, game first. And after kind of just getting hit with the hard truth that like my current skill level wasn't good enough to go pro, it was like, okay, well, I'm grinding the game, but like I'm missing something. So
Hmm.
the something was just leveling up outside of the game, I think.
Mm.
And like, having time management skills and actually like being efficient and discipline, all that stuff that comes from out of the game, I think is what I was missing.
What prompted you to start taking care of yourself?
So about a year ago exactly now, I kind of like went through some, like I had like a loss of a loved one, and I also gave up competing at that time because I gave myself a year deadline. So they kind of matched up around the same timing, and that kind of just like made me realize like, dude, you're not where you want to be. Like, you need to be better in the sense that like you gave it your all, but it wasn't enough, and that's because your all was very little. The effort I was putting in mentally just wasn't coming out, and
Mm.
I was just burned out and all that. I was just like, dude, there's got to be a better way. So going to myself first, I think was big.
It was interesting for me. I actually, for like a long time, like I actually really struggled with like my own health. I grew up like quite chubby, like
Hmm.
really chubby, and I actually like through my teens to my like mid 20s, like I tried working out and like creating like a workout habit like multiple times, like, and it never took. And I
Hmm.
honestly was like, I think at like 25 or 26, I'm like, I'm never gonna be like, I'm never gonna be not chubby. and I'm never going to be able to like create a workout habit. But for me, actually, it was interesting. It was creating like sufficiently exciting goals that actually got me going to the gym. And it was like the progress of chasing after those goals that like helped me keep going. And surprisingly, I was just looking it up. We were just talking about this earlier, that journey started like 10 years ago, which is like kind of mind-boggling to me. What has been your journey in self-care? Like what have been the things that have been particularly impactful to you and your kind of mental health and how you approach the game? Like what are the things that you've been doing?
I think it all started with Huberman Labs podcast, and I guess like if it was anything, it was really just learning that like whatever I was doing wasn't good. To kind of expand off of that, he like talks a lot about sleep and things like that. So the first kind of like big thing that triggered with the sleep was like morning walks. And now I go on morning walks daily if I can. Sometimes I skip. But, over the course of a week, the average kind of adds up. So I like to go for morning walks, probably like 5 to 15 minutes in the morning.
Have
Um,
the morning walks are supposed to help with like falling asleep.
right.
Has that been your experience?
100%. Yeah, like, so I used to stay up all the time, like, it was just really hard to stay asleep or, like, fall asleep, like, being on my screen and stuff like that, but, like, after I started morning walks, it slowly, like, pushed my sleep schedule back, and now it's, like, at least, more normal, I would say.
Okay. Okay. What else has been impactful for you?
I would say the second biggest one is probably exercise. So similar to you, like I wasn't able to stick to a workout or anything like that. And I always thought I was gonna be skinny. Like, that's definitely like a big thing that I struggle with was just my weight and I guess feeling really small. So when I started working out, that kind of like gave me some kind of confidence and obviously I felt better. So not only did I feel better outside of the game, I feel like when I actually played the game, it just felt easier to one, manage my emotions, but two, like feel confident in my own play and things like that. So
Yeah.
definitely exercise.
The working out is important so that we can move our 50-gram mice.
Right. Yeah. You know, hopefully it'll be lighter eventually. We won't need to work out.
Yeah. I know journaling has also been like really big for you. Like
Hmm.
what is journaling given you? It's not something I've ever really done that much.
I think with how easy it is to like lose organization, like what's going on from the day to day, like where I want my mind frame to be, it's very easy to just write it on paper and just like quiet my mind and like kind of funnel it towards certain topics. So when I was competing and like shortly after I was competing, it was kind of just like, okay, like you suck at this, like you're not going to be good enough for this. It's a talent thing. The time you're putting in, you're wasted a year, blah, 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 blah. And then when I write it down on paper, it's like, okay, like you did this, this, and this, and then you're looking to go here. It's
Mhm.
just very easy to kind of like, once you have it on paper, to understand that it's not as bad as it seems, and, like, to get to where you need to be is not as hard as it seems.
Well, sometimes like when you write it down on paper too, you also have the opportunity of like actually taking the time to see what you're thinking.
Mhm.
And more often than not, when you write it all out, you're like in your head, it sounds really reasonable. But when you write it out, you're like, this feels kind of ridiculous.
Right. 100%.
And it like gives you some perspective.
Mhm.
What about sleep? What's been the journey with sleep? Like how important do you think that is for like performance in game?
Probably the most important factor. I guess, like, if I don't have energy levels and I don't have good sleep, I definitely have, like, a run it down mentality, and, like, each game doesn't feel winnable, like, I'm much easier to kinda, I guess, lose my cool, and then on top of that, like, just individual performance-wise, without good sleep or, like, without proper sleep, I feel very slow and lethargic, and, like, there's a lot of brain fog, and I feel like I haven't had brain fog that much, like, maybe I wanna say, like, once over the course of, like, the past month or 2.
Okay.
So, my experience with brain fog is pretty much gone, and I'm just, like, way more, I guess, in the zone.
Yeah, I found even for me that when I don't get enough sleep, I just notice significantly like worse performance. Like I'm just you don't play as well generally. It's interesting too, they talk about like for working out, and I think there's relationship here too with Valorant is you go to the gym to do the exercise. That's where you create like the stress on your body. But without sufficient sleep, you actually never repair. So like without sufficient sleep, you actually can't even get stronger. And I think it's similar to like Valorant. If we look at playing ranked games partly as performance, but partly as learning, then the only way that we can kind of consolidate that learning is through good sleep.
Right.
We know through studies that like a big part of like internalizing learning happens with sleep, and it's like a and so I think it's a very common thing for like gamers not to think that they need sleep. But if you want to improve, like it's basically impossible to like internalize that learning if you're not sleeping.
And this kind of brings me into another point. Like the grind culture is kind of pushed a lot, and at the cost of sleep, it's just like, oh yeah, let's just play more games because that's going to be useful. Whereas like in reality, like if you play less games but sleep more, we're way better off. So I don't know how that culture became a thing, but it's definitely a misconception.
I think it's become a thing. Well, there's that like the hustle, like Sigma grind set kind of thing, right? But there's also, I think it's maybe been a little bit popularized because of like the Chinese pro approach to like League,
Mm,
which is basically like stretch yourself to like inhumane limits to like achieve like a brief peak and then absolutely like flame out.
hmm
I think like famously, like I think Uzi is like a really famously he's like the OG ADC in China, and I think he's has like numerous health problems,
mm,
which because of I think just how much they play.
right.
How have you noticed this self care supporting your improvement in the game or outside the game?
I guess like having some type of self care gives me time to self reflect,
Mhm.
and self reflection is really key to really any growth. I think because you can kind of see like where you can improve. And it definitely feels like now that I have some type of self-care, like my progress in the game and out of the game is just way faster because, given the time, like I can see what's working for me and what's not, and like actually making changes towards that. And I think it's really important to have that time to yourself because then you can actually reach your potential. And in something that's like very competitive, burnout is a real thing.
Mhm.
Your emotions are gonna take a hold of you and things like that. So I guess like having downtime and leisure time is really important to kind of like return the baseline.
Well, and to like have space for like reflection, right? I think you always see posts on like Reddit where people have like thousands of hours,
Hmm.
and somehow people still manage to be like in let's say like bronze or something.
Hmm.
But to me, that would mean that they are probably absolutely spamming games
Hmm.
and they don't have any space in their life for reflection. Like they're literally almost somehow because of the structure of their life, they're like finding a way to like actually not consciously choose to improve.
Right.
The other thing we've talked about a little bit is like critical self. And so for people who haven't heard of the term before, it's like the critical self is that voice in your head that's always like, "Oh, you're such an idiot. Oh, like of course you didn't check that corner when you should have because you were being lazy. You're so bad at this game." It's like that voice, right? And it's the I think in some ways like relevant to this topic, it's like the opposite of self-care. What's interesting, it's often a driver of people who really, really want to do well. Like, like there's surgeons and lawyers out there who like have this thing of like you are not enough. And like that's the thing that like pushes them to, like keep going, keep going. And I remember I was listening to a podcast and one guy was talking about how like he knows it's not good for him, but he's afraid of losing his edge if he were ever to give that voice up.
Hmm.
And then in that same podcast, they're like, well, if you have a son or a daughter, would you want them to talk to themselves with the same voice that you talk to yourself? And he's like, of course not. And then they're like, well, why would you ever want to talk to yourself that way then? And I think it's just this idea that we don't actually realize how toxic we can be to ourselves, and how that actually like limits our capability of doing things. Like if we can imagine how possible things feel of getting better when you tell yourself actively how terrible you are, like it doesn't feel very possible.
Right.
But we've talked about this a little bit. Like what has been your experience with that critical self?
I think it's gotten to me where I am now, pretty much in all facets of life, especially with the gaming thing. Like that's how I got good at games in the first place. Like I would critique everything I did. I would reflect on it pretty much right after. Like I don't know why I did that. Like, kind of seeing like the goods and the bads. And then especially like with competing and stuff like that with Fortnite and with Valorant, it kind of forces you to stay on the grind.
Mhm.
I guess it's like a toxic version of discipline in a way. Because
Mm,
like there's like this constant like nagging that's telling you, you have to do this, otherwise you're gonna suck. You already suck. You don't want to suck more. You're falling behind, things like that. So like, really having that motivator to keep you going. And obviously not sustainable, which is why I like crashed and burned pretty much at the end of my Valorant career. And I just had like a ton of self-doubt
mhm,
and I just didn't know what to do. So after working through that with you, it was very easy to kind of like reframe my thinking to like understand like, oh, critical self can be useful, but it's not a healthy or a sustainable way to like go about improvement, things like that. So I guess kind of like acknowledging when it's good to be critical with yourself and like when it's like unhealthy is like a healthy balance to kind of like achieve or like strive for. And currently, I think at least in the gaming sphere, I've done a good, I guess, 180 with that. Like the critical
mm.
self kind of just like, oh yeah, you could have done that better. Is it really important? Probably not.
Well, you were talking about that flow video where part of it is being able to maybe like outside the game, being able to without emotion say what you did right and wrong, but you
Hmm.
don't need to be like criticizing yourself. You can just be like, oh, I'm going to improve this next time, but it doesn't have to have that like judgment on it, right? Like, it
Right.
doesn't have to
Right.
have that like a super negative feel.
Hmm.
I think we also, I think like I also notice this when I see someone like, I don't know, someone like Demon One. When you watch his like face cam when he's making his plays, like the guy is like ice cold.
Hmm.
Like, and so you can imagine then, I would imagine at least, that like between rounds when he's made a mistake, I don't think he's in his head. I think he's just like wiped it away and he's like, go next, right?
Hmm. And it's
Was
pretty
that your
impressive.
experience when you were competing? Or were you kind of more in your own head?
I was definitely like the last round, still thinking about it, the next round type of thing. Even after like timeouts and things like that, it's just like I could have done this better if I won this round. This round wouldn't even be happening this way. Like,
Mm.
why are like we still doing this thing, even though the last round, like, just spiraling out of control, living in the past. So definitely not the way to win. Maybe really good in critical analysis after the game, but
Yeah.
yeah, while you're playing, there's no purpose.
Yeah, I think it's also it gets in the way of performance too. Like I think when you listen to your critical self, actually sometimes even like you don't even need to listen to your critical self. Sometimes your teammates do it for you, right?
Hmm.
But like I feel like a really common outcome is like the critical self when you listen to that, it's like really negative. It really hurts your self-esteem and it really hurts your confidence.
Hmm.
And I think in my mind it actually gets embodied in, instead of playing to win, you actually start playing not to lose.
Hmm.
Like, and I think we hear that in like our ranked lobbies too, where, after like 4 or 5 straight losses, your teammates are like, just don't peek. Like that's the recipe to winning the game is like, don't peek. Like,
Right.
don't take engagements. Like what's been your experience around that? Like, is there like a fundamentally, is there like a, do you notice that shift between like almost an active and a passive play style?
100%. I think like when you're down rounds, I think you said it well, like people take less risk, but like the risk is like what you need to actually turn the tides and take the game into your control. And inherently, I think Valorant is just a momentum based game. So, like with the way the economy works, with the way like your teammates will communicate, spacing, all things like that, you know, if you're not having like an active play style, you won't ever be able to fight against the momentum So it's
Mhm,
just like the way I envision it is like it's like a really big wave and it just gets bigger and bigger. And then you're just standing there waiting until you get 13 0'd.
mhm,
Because, if you're have no active play style, you're literally just waiting for them to make plays on you.
mhm,
So
mhm.
definitely feel that way. I guess I'm also curious to see like how does that feel in your games? Because like with the critical self and like the active and passive play style, at least in higher level games for me, people tend to try to come up with solutions either inherently to make plays or like they try to go for kills. Whereas like maybe in your lobbies they would go the opposite approach and kind of like play safer and safer.
I think, like, the default I usually see is, like, you try to play safer and safer, and by playing safer and safer, you kind of allow the other team to dictate the game, really.
Hmm.
And we see this in life too, right? Like, a lot of people, like, in their jobs, let's say, will actually let their whole day be dictated by their inbox.
Mm.
Which means, like, they actually have no, like, agency on their life. And so, yeah, I that's what I notice in my games. Actually, but the one thing I wanted to ask you about, because we've kinda talked about this before. When you were competing, you also had told me before that you didn't wanna play ranked anymore at one point. Like, you're like,
Mhm.
and so there's also, I think, like, a feeling of, like, the critical self inspires in us like a really strong like dogmatic or like being really stubborn about things. And then that, like, but what was your experience of that, like, of not wanting to play ranked, and how do you think the critical self played into that?
That's a very good question. I guess like the reason why I didn't want to play ranked in the first place to outline it was like it wasn't good practice, like one to one to what I was doing in scrims and in tournaments. Like in ranked, you have to play very self sufficiently. Like you don't really
Mhm.
want to rely on your teammates. And then in team play, of course, you don't really want to take as many risks alone because then
Yes.
they get man advantage. So the critical self in that case, like whenever I would play ranked, like I'm kind of just constantly like telling myself this game sucks, like everyone I play with, they're just like playing like bots. Like, how is this the highest ranked possible? No one's playing the rank correctly. Like, so that kind of like instead of me trying to facilitate better gameplay towards my teammates, I would take the opposite approach. I would kind of just like fall into their level and then
Mhm.
just run it down, don't calm. Like,
Mhm.
I guess not being the bigger person and like
Mhm.
just easily getting consumed that, just because they're doing it, I'm going to do it too. This is a waste of my time. I'm just going to go and use ranked as gun duels. And I guess, like, that's kinda, like, why ultimately decided to not really play ranked that much anymore because
Mhm.
it felt like a waste of time, but, like, in hindsight, there is a lot to learn from ranked, right? Like, you kinda, like, figure out, like, individual plays or, like, maybe increase your mental fortitude
Mhm.
or, try to, like, come up with little small plays you can do with maybe one teammate to
Mhm.
still have the same similar effect that you would in, like, a higher level play, so, yeah. Trying to make ranked useful in some type of aspect would have been big, I think.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. What if we've been talking about the critical self, obviously we're kind of talking a lot about why it's like not good for you. What have you replaced it with, or what is like your antidote to the critical self?
Hmm. I guess, like, instead of yelling at myself, I kinda don't talk to myself well or bad. Like, I kinda
Mhm.
just, like, see things for how they are.
Mhm.
So, I guess, like, the best way to say it would be, like, more like an observer. Of course, I get frustrated or excited when I make a great play or not, but I find that my best performances are, like, when I just don't have a reaction.
Mhm.
And this kinda goes back to what you're saying with, like, the Demon 1. Like, whether or not, like, you whiff or you clutch, like, in the end, it's still the same thing because you still haven't won or lost the match.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, I think having that observer as, like, the replacement is very big, not only to, like, play your best, but also to, I guess, understand what is happening. Because, like,
Mhm.
if you're just observing, you're not gonna be like, "Okay, that was really good," and then you just throw everything else out the window. Like, "Oh, yeah,
Mhm.
because we won this round, like, we don't have to fix X, Y, and Z." Or, like, if you lose the round, everything you did in that round wasn't bad. So you can still, like, see objectively, like, these things were working and these things weren't working.
Mhm.
So
Mhm. Like, to be able to view things through clear eyes, right?
exactly. Yeah.
I think the other thing people can do is, and I think this is like going to be probably a consistent theme is like we actually don't know exactly what the best method will be for every single person because there's like
Mhm.
enough variety. But one thing to try for sure is like just positive self-talk.
Mhm.
And what's interesting with positive self-talk is you will know when you're lying to yourself.
Mm.
So if your positive self-talk would be you're basically a radiant player, like you're just gonna diff ass pass, like your body knows that's not true.
Mhm.
And so it's actually helpful to have like positive self-talk that's like rooted in things that you know. Like maybe I think for me, the positive self-talk would be, that I'm putting in the time, like I'm putting in the effort and I'm going to see results. Like, and I can trust in that. I know I'm working at this. And so I think for different people to be like different things. Like, have you seen particular things work well for like your coaching clients?
Yeah, I think the big thing is kind of like trusting yourself. So
Hmm.
in terms of I guess positive self-talk, like if you kind of like meet a metric, I think that's a win in my book. So for example, for duelist players, I kind of tell them like, hey, if you get one kill and that's a first blood, no matter the outcome of the round, like that's
You
typically
did
a
your job.
win. Right. You did your job. So like, you don't have to get upset or anything about that. And if you didn't get the first blood, did you get traded? That's
Mhm,
still a win. So I guess like changing the metric to something else is very big, and
mhm,
I think that's had a lot of success, at least for duelist players. They have like something to focus on. They can kind of like gauge their success on something. With controller players, or I guess any other role that's not a duelist, like it's a little bit harder, I think, to
mhm.
have that metric because first bloods really shouldn't be your job. So like
Yes.
those success criteria there is kind of like, did you communicate with your team? Did you use your entire util kit this round? Did you get this map control by using util and like your teammate didn't die?
Mhm,
Like that's like inherent value that you'll never see on the scoreboard,
mhm,
but you prevented a death there, or
mhm,
you actually gained this space. So having those, I guess, little checkpoints in the game, I think help a lot.
mhm. Are there any self-care things that you feel like we needed to talk about before you jump off? Like that we didn't talk about? I was just looking at the list here.
Guess we talked about
Meditation?
meditation. Oh, that's honestly, that's probably the most important one on this list.
Okay.
That's something I definitely neglect and I've tried to get more into. But out of all the content I consume, it seems to always circle back to meditation. Like whether or not it be performing, flow state or anything like that, it always seems to be coming back to like quieting your inner voice so that you can
Mhm,
let things happen, at least with the inner game of tennis. And even just outside of the game, like meditation helps you, or can help you, like be more mindful of like what you're doing in the moment. So like when
mhm,
you're doom scrolling on,
mhm,
TikTok or YouTube, like you're like, "Oh, I'm doom scrolling for the past 10 minutes, like maybe it's time I do something else." So having that awareness, I find in Valorant stops me from autopiloting.
mhm,
Like,
mhm,
why did I do that? Like I
mhm,
know better than that. Okay, let's like refocus. Let me sit up, drink some water, you
mhm.
know, kind of just like
Kind of reset.
reset, exactly. And without like meditation, it's a lot harder to do it because you don't have the practice. Like you're not really going to be able to like, oh, I'm autopiloting right now in game if you haven't really done it out of the game.
The way I've heard it explained is kind of like this is reality and this is you. And there's
Hmm.
like a gap. But for like a lot of people, there's no gap. It's just like this. So like reality happens and you react. There's no gap. Like it just you can't control it. When in reality, like you do actually have a choice, right? Like you have a choice to like if someone cuts you off, you have a choice to honk them and cuss them out in your head, right? Or you have a choice to think about, oh, maybe they're in a rush, or maybe they have an emergency. And I think like meditation gives you the awareness to create that space.
Hmm.
I think it also is like particularly useful, like you were alluding to it, in this like current culture of social media and like constant dopamine hits of engagement to notice and be aware of like where our focus is.
Right.
If anyone actually does meditation coming out of this video, the way I was really helpful, I heard this was that a lot of people, like when they do focused meditation, you're like supposed to focus on your breath. And most people can't. And they're like, wow, I'm really bad. Like I suck at meditation. The actual like meditation, like obviously it's great if you can just focus on your breath and you can do it for 10 minutes and you never have any external thoughts that wander through. That's not anyone really. What's really helpful is actually to think about it as whenever you wander, the bicep curl, like the exercise of meditation is when you wander that you come back. Like
Mhm.
that's actually the exercise you're training. Like that's actually the movement you're training. And if you keep doing that over and over, you're going to train that awareness and you're going to train that ability to come back. Because it's really not really possible to never wander.
Yeah, just to kind of go off of this, like regularly when like I meditate, like I just autopilot or like even doze off to the point to where like I'm just like half asleep. Because like your eyes are closed, you're focused
Yeah.
on the breath, and
Yeah.
just suddenly it's just like you're just out. So definitely a work in progress still.
Yeah.
But yeah, thinking about it more as reps is a big one. Because then like now you can be like nicer to yourself. It's like, oh yeah,
Mhm.
like boom, +1 XP, I guess.
The other cool one is like Andrew Huberman as well talks about skill development is like do a skill for like an hour and a half and then do non-sleep deep rest. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's supposed to actually help with skill consolidation because I think it mimics some of the restorative consolidation aspects of sleep.
The first time I did NSDR, and I've recommended it to my community as well. And
Yeah.
like the feedback I've got from it is like it's like kind of crazy because like you never really feel like that before. Because like
Mhm.
normally, like even if you think about sleep, most people I think wake up from alarm clocks and like they wake up not feeling super fresh. But when you
Mhm.
wake up from like NSDR, in my experience, not even waking up, but like when you finish the session, if you actually can get through it, which I've fallen asleep too. But if
Yeah,
you can
falling
actually
asleep
get
too.
through it, it feels incredible. Like you're just like focused in, at least for my few times that I've actually gone through it. So highly recommend. And like you said with skill consolidation, like you could probably do this like, after you aim train or like
Mhm.
after you play some Valorant games and you take some notes and then boom, you just NSDR. And then this is probably the most useful. And this is how I recommend it to my students that have a free schedule. Like if they want to play like 8 games a day. Normally, I'm just like, okay, don't play 8 games a day.
Mhm.
But if they have the time, they could like split it up into 2 blocks. So they play 3 to 4 games, take a break, eat, whatever, and then like maybe they NSDR and then they play the next 3 to 4 games. Like
Mhm.
I think that's how you can kind of get the most out of your day. If
Mhm.
for some reason gaming is like your 9 to 5 or something.
Yeah. Yeah, or like go and take a walk or something.
Yeah.
That was a great discussion. Thanks everyone for listening in and until next time.
Until next time.
See y'all later.